Okay, so we're holding a Parshas Vayechi, Perek Mem Ches. We're up to, let's say, Pasuk Hey. Before we go back to the Psukim, I want to attempt to put together various allusions that we've noticed in the past and see if we can make one coherent picture out of this. There's something going on here. There's something I don't think I'm getting fully, but there's a lot that we can at least point to. And we'll start the question from the following place. Here in this story at Yaakov's deathbed in Perek Mem Ches, there's something involving hands and eyes, and placing of hands. Vayar Yosef Kiyoshis Aviv Yad Yeminoi Al Reish Ephraim Vayei Rabbeinu. That's in Pasuk Yud Zayin. Yosef saw that his father placed his right hand onto the head of Ephraim, and this was wrong in his eyes and in the eyes of Yosef. These three terms, the two nouns, Yad and Ayin, and the one verb of Yashis are very significant in the narrative of Yaakov's death, because when Yaakov went down to Mitzrayim, Hashem appeared to him at Beersheba and told him, Yosef Yoshis Yodoi al Einecha. Yosef will place his hand on your eyes, which is something about Yaakov's death. So there's some prediction made about Yaakov's death. A prediction involving placing hand and eye. And indeed, in the death scene, the extended death scene of Yaakov, which is Parshas Vayechi, there is a placing involving a hand, and that also affects an eye, Yosef's eye. But it's different than what's predicted. What's predicted is that Yosef will place his hand on Yaakov's eyes. And instead, Yaakov places his hand, and it's evil in Yosef's eyes. So that's the problem here. What to make of this inversion? Okay. Now we notice further, and what I want to do is I want to show you, here's what I'll do. I'll show you all the psukim, all the allusions and the references, and then we'll see if how we might put this all together. In the same narrative in Perek Mem Ches, where eyes are very prominent, by the way, because Yaakov could not see, right? And in other words, when the pasuk stresses that it was bad in the eyes of Yosef, there's something, there's a reason why the pasuk is stressing that it was bad in the eyes of Yosef, and that's because Einei Yisrael kovdu mizayin, and Yaakov couldn't see, so which is why Yosef assumed that Yaakov doesn't see what he's doing. This whole parsha is about, a lot of it is about the fact that Yaakov can't see. And in that same context, he says, that's in Pasuk Yud Aleph. I did not expect, I didn't judge that I would even see your face, and now Hashem showed me your zera. Okay. So he gets to see something they didn't expect. This is ironic because this is about the person who can't see. Fine, but al kapanim, there's a seeing. There's a seeing enabled by a surprising kind of seeing, enabled by Elikim, that the blind man has. Remember this, very very important to remember. Here, there's a blind person. See, let's just make let me stress this point to make it clear. Pasuk Yud. He can't see. He can't see. And then he says, next pasuk, I didn't even expect to see you, now I see your children. But we just said he can't see. And further pushing the irony, Yosef thinks he doesn't know which one's which. Because he can't see, but he knows good and well. So can he see or can't he see? Okay? So as we discussed in the past, his eyes are old. They're heavy from age. But he's seeing because God grants him a vision. So he has a kind of supernatural vision, superhuman vision. His age really led to a deterioration in his vision naturally, but God can make him see. So we have a blind person seeing, essentially. Okay. Now, this rare word of Pilel occurs in Parshas Mishpatim, where it says, so people are fighting and they hit a pregnant woman whose children leave her body, children, babies, plural. If there's no asain, no death of the woman, then kashi yoshel biflilim. Okay, so firstly you notice flilim and ayin tachas ayin yod tachas yod. Okay, all right, that in and of itself wouldn't be that compelling. However, we also have the word asain. Is there an asain or is there not an asain in the woman who lost her two children? Now, Rachel, right? Why did I say two? Because Yeladeha plural. She was pregnant with twins. Rachel, Yaakov was afraid would lose her two children. He says, like v'yotzu yiladeha me'iti. And now, what if you take the second one, v'karo asain? So the asain is that the woman and her two children should all be gone. Should all three of them be killed. Okay. So this seems to be an allusion to Rachel, the Hara, focused on Hira Yoin, like we find in Ephraim, and Isaiah. She's focused on her children, of course. That's Rachel's whole focus. All she wants is children. So she's the Isha Hara. And that story anchors Ayin Tachas Ayin and Yod Tachas Yod. And there's something about Flilim and, of course, Yoshis Baal Ha'isha. Oh, did I mention the Yoshis? I don't know if I even mentioned it. Of course, Asher Yoshis Allah Baal Ha'isha. So here we have that Yoshis verb again, importantly. Yosh, so even maybe without the Asin, that would be significant, okay? I'll leave that to you to decide. But we have Asin, which links us to the Yaakov narrative, Rachel and her two children and their possible death. We have Yoshis, like Yosef Yoshis Elanecha and Yoshis Aviv. We have Flilim, which Yaakov said, and we have Ayin Tachas Ayin Yod Tachas Yod, and in the Yosef Yaakov story we have the Ayin of Yaakov, the Ayin of Yosef, the Yad of Yosef, the Yad of Yaakov. Okay. Now, let's continue the links over here. So there's something called Plilim. Now, who does Plilus? So let's say in Yaakov's story, there's two people who do Plilus, right? There's meaning I, in my Plilus means like judgment, estimation of what's possible. In my estimation, this would never have happened. So what does that tell us? That there's two Plilim. There's a Plilim that man does, and there's Plilim that God does. And the Plilim that God does is beyond the Plilim, superior, transcendent, to the Plilim that man does. Man does a Plilim of what he expects to be within the realm of the possible. And Kim does a Plilim that's even greater than that. Okay. Just keep that in mind, that idea. And that reminds us of another pasuk about Plilim. This is in the beginning of Shmuel, where Eli told his children, it is in Shmuel, Seif Perik Beis. Well, not Seif, okay. Perik Beis pasuk Chof Hey. Im yachet ish lo ish ufil lo yalehim. Im ladino yachet ish mi yispala lo yveleshmu. Klavim chovtz and okay. If a man sins to his fellow man, so God can adjudicate, can make it right. if you sin to Hashem, mi yispal aloich. Wow. Amazing thing. What's it saying? It's saying like this. As we mentioned, there's two kinds of plilos. There's man's plilos and God's plilos. Now, man's plilos says, if you sin to your friend, you did something wrong, and your friend holds it against you. But God has its own plilos, which can make that right. Just like in the Yaakov story, Yaakov didn't expect this to happen, but God made it right. And, more significantly, I think, this is really the whole punchline of the whole story of Yosef and his brothers at the end of Parshas Viyachi, Parak Nun, Pasuk Chav. You meant evil, but God meant good. So, in other words, there's man's thinking, and then there was what man expects to result from his actions, and what he expects the future to bring, and what he considers to be the just deserts and the consequences that are due to his actions. And then there's God. And why is God different? Because atem chashavtem alay ra lekim chashav al. So, in other words, the brothers said, look, the plilos over here would be one more thing. They did evil to Yosef, and he should do evil back to them. But God can take something that man thinks is evil and mean it for good. So that means God is running a different level, system, order over the affairs of man, wherein what appears to man to be evil might actually be good, and therefore one cannot repay the evil of man with evil, because the evil of man in God's system is good. Okay, so what do we take from all this? That, okay, we have the word plilim. We have the word plilim in the context of the pregnant woman who's children. We have Yaakov pointing out that there's a plilos over here that it needs God to do, because it's not something a man could have done. And then that takes us to this general idea that sin against your fellow man, and you can always make the plilos of God can always make things right, or indicate a level upon which they're right, you can say. Point to a level within which they're right. Sin to Hashem and you're in big trouble, because then you're not going to be righted. Okay, this is a profound and important idea, parenthetically. And then that idea of that God has his own plilos is central to the whole Yosef story, because he says, you meant evil and I meant good. And think about this. What's going on in the Yosef story? He's not doing ayin tachasayin, right? He's not repaying them in kind. This is very important. So therefore, what you did to me, I don't have to do back to you. That's the whole point, right? They assume that he's going to take revenge. And he says, no, what looks like Ra is really Toiv. So what does that say for ayin tachasayin? Okay? So, you see how there's a bunch of things going on up here? Ayin tachasayin, you take to the plilim, and we know plilim make judges, and the judges actually don't do ayin tachasayin, they take money instead. Maybe that's relevant here, that we don't actually repay in kind, just like Yosef didn't take payment in kind. Okay, and then, and this I'm throwing in because I think I was going to say it's like it's a hunch, and we'll see where it takes us. But it's more than that. Both Yaakov and Yosef said very important statements. Am I in the place of God? When Rachel said to Yaakov, give me children, he said, am I in the place of God who withheld children from you? God has to give you children. I can't. When the brothers came to Yosef and said, okay, Yosef is going to repay us evil for the evil we've done, he said, am I in the place of God? Now, this is the key point. In other words, it's the key point that Yosef makes. Man is not in the place of God, so therefore what man sees from his perspective is not the same thing as what's happening from God's perspective. And it's the very same point that Yaakov brings up when he says, I never expected this to happen, but God made it happen. Which he's teaching a lesson there, we could say, meaning Yosef learned something from that. But I'm just saying, it's pointing to that point that God operates on a different level than man does. Okay? Because this is consistent with the fact that Yaakov said, I am not in the place of God, meaning I recognize that there's what God does and there's what I do, and those are two different things. Okay. All right. So that's another pasuk that we can throw into this whole mix. Right? That Yaakov refuses to give life. Yosef refuses to punish, or maybe to take life or to punish, because they both recognize there's something superhuman, there's something beyond man. Man is not God. And notice then, okay, so now putting this all together, so you see all these allusions, and the question is what to make of this, but I want to just point out one more maybe key thing. Ayin tachas ayin and tachas elikim oni. Okay. So perhaps you can say, and this I think Shmuel gave me this idea, I think it was him. Ayin tachas ayin, yod tachas yod. There's the solution to the problem we asked. In other words, we asked, not a contradiction, we asked something strange over here. It was predicted, Hashem told Yaakov that when you die, Yosef will place his hand on your eyes. Instead, Yaakov placed his hand, and something happened to Yosef's eyes, enough. So what's going on? The answer is, ayin, tachas, ayin. Yod, tachas, yod. One eye could replace another. Okay. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Right? Very nice. In other words, cool. And does this have something to do with tachas alikim? Tachas alikim, right? Ayin, tachas, ayin. Saying, oh, Yaakov's hand replaces Yosef's hand. Yosef's eyes replace Yaakov's eyes. And does this have something to do with tachas alikim? So, I think it could all make sense, but it's hard to understand. Tachas elikim only means man is not God. Okay. Man is not God. What does that mean, man is not God? So therefore, let's say you have a blind person, he lost his eye. Well, let's think about it like this. Someone lost his eye, so you say, ayin tachas ayin, blind the other guy. But you remember, see, Yaakov was blind and Yaakov saw. So what do you do like that? Here's my shayla halacha, so to speak. Let's say you blind someone, but he's a navi, so he could see without his eyes, like Yaakov. You have to pay? Well, one thing's for sure. I think you can't blind the blinder. It wouldn't be fair to do ayin tachas ayin mamish, because there's a godly system that's above the human system, right? Im yechta ish le'ish upillei elikim. Yechta she'ish says like this: ayin tachas ayin. From the human perspective, if someone lost his eye to another person, that other person deserves to lose the eye back. But really, man is not God. So what does it mean if man is not God? Just because a person lost his eye, it's not what you think necessarily. It may be good. Maybe it's good. Maybe he's going to see without his eyes. Maybe he'll see better without his eyes, like Yaakov was able to see things into the future that Yosef himself, the one who could see, was unable to see. Well, the one who with sight wasn't able to notice. So go figure. Well, that's what you do. You go figure. Meaning you say like this: you can't do ayin tachas ayin mamish because we don't know what's tova, what's not raw. We don't know what's tova, what's not. You can't take revenge. Just like Yosef didn't take revenge. That's the whole point. You can't be goimel ra'ah. That's what they're afraid of. They were afraid. The brothers were afraid. What? Hoshev Yoshev Lonu. It's called Lora'ah Shegamalnu Esay. We're going to repay all the evil. And there was a message, Ra'ah Gemalucha. What's the big move of Yosef? Ra does not get repaid with Ra. It's such a big move. There's the whole Eishes Chayil about this. As we mentioned numerous times, Eishes Chayil corresponds to Bereshis, and in Eishes Chayil you have Gemalasu Toiv V'loi Ra. That's the Eishes Chayil, who, according to the allusions of the Mizmor of the Parak Eishes Chayil, is actually Yosef, the Isha Yiras Hashem, Itis Halo Tnulo Mipriyadeha, Yihalu Bashar Maseo. The Priyadav is he supports his whole family, and he gets praised, and nobody can find any fault in him. Why can no one find fault in him? Because he's Goimel Toiv V'loi Ra, even to those who are Goimel Him Ra. That's his whole move. It's whole move, and we discussed it in the Parshas Miketz. He says, the whole Yosef move is to say, You might as well pay Tov for Ra because you don't know what Ra is. You know what Tov is because God has his own way of doing things beyond humans. In which case, ayin tachas ayin, Yosef wouldn't do ayin tachas ayin. Let's just say that, right? Let's say ayin tachas ayin, so blind the person that blinded you. Yosef said no, because God means it for the good. Now, what could you do though? You could pay for it, and I think that's because, meaning even if it's good for the person, well, maybe it's good for him that you're paying him. You can turn it into good. It's fungible into some other value. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how to do that. But, I mean, I have a hunch. The point is like this. The point is that if a person is in the place of God, that means whatever he thinks is the absolute truth. So then if a person loses his eye, the absolute truth from a human perspective is that that's a terrible thing and the other person has to lose his eye. But to kick it up to money is to take it up a level of abstraction and say, look, the fact that he lost his eye, he's able to notice, smart enough to notice that there's something beyond having the eye. Now, what's beyond having the eye is the value of the eye. And the value of the eye, by the way, you might unlock through seeing like Yaakov did, perhaps. But that's what the kesef represents. That instead of the eye itself, which is what the human cares about, let's turn this into an abstraction. As I once spoke about in my yet unpublished essay on ayin tachas ayin. Okay, on ayin tachas ayin being turned into money. By the way, the whole story of Yosef is very much revolving around kesef, right? They sold him for kesef, and he collected all the kesef. So Yosef, I would say, is the one who turns ayin tachas ayin into kesef, because he's not going ra. He recognizes kiechta ishlesh upil elakim, which is to say that, you know what, man thinks about it one way, but God has his own way of thinking about things. This he learned from Yaakov, that says, who said, and somehow this allows Yaakov to replace Yosef. So what does that mean? That means first, and the hands to switch, meaning basically I'm thinking something like this, that once no man is in the place of God, so let's say Yaakov can't see and Yosef could see. So you think Yosef is the one who can see, but actually it's Yaakov who could see, right? And you think that Yosef is the one who has power and he's supposed to put his hands on Yaakov's eyes, but no, really Yaakov is the one who puts his hands. So the point is that once we realize Asach Salikimoni, once we realize man is not in the place of God, then any particular eye is fungible, any particular hand is fungible, and any one other person's hand or I could stand in for that, just like Yaakov's hand stands in for Yosef's and Yosef's eye stand in for Yaakov. I don't know, something like that. Something I think very, very important here. I'm not fully getting it, which of course means I didn't work on it sufficiently. That's the rule. But I think we pointed to something. And again, I was saying before, it's very significant that, see, it was said that Yosef is going to put his hands on Yaakov's eyes, and instead, Yosef sees something. So what does that tell us? That the blind person, the one whose eyes were not working, actually was the better seer. Vayera be'einav. Not sure where this goes. I thought this was clearer. Okay, that's the gist of it. That there's a replacement here. So basically what we can take out of here is that there's a replacement revolving around hands and eyes, shifting from Yaakov to Yosef and Yosef to Yaakov. And that idea that there's a replacement between one hand and the other, or one eye to the other, takes us to the story of ayin tachas ayin. Atachas Elokim Ani says you don't pay evil for evil. There's something beyond what humans can think of. And perhaps once it's beyond what humans could think of, maybe that leads us to saying, well, what's the difference if it's my hand or his hand? Now, especially this way, I think we mentioned in the past, the whole parasha is really about Yosef turning into Yaakov, because if Yaakov tells him here, okay, Ephraim and Menashe like Reuben and Shimon, that means that Yosef and Yaakov are an identity, as it were, identical. And therefore, what was predicted to be done with Yosef's hand, can no surprise that's done with Yaakov's hand, and what was predicted to be done to Yaakov's eyes can now have some effect on Yosef's eyes, because in this very parasha they're being made into one. Again, both of these people said Asach Selekimani, which I have a deep hunch that makes them the same person for two reasons, or maybe three. One reason is because they both said this expression, okay, a unique expression to say, I'm not in the place of God. Clearly, only certain people will speak like that. Second reason, let's say, that relates to the first reason, is that as it says that Yaakov's face is under the Kisei HaKavod, so he is literally under God, and it also says that Yosef's face was to Yaakov, so then they're both the same person, as it were. They're both Tachas Elakim. And third reason is because like this, because if a person thinks he's in the place of God, then there's lots of people, lots of gods. But once a person realizes that he doesn't replace God, so that means the Tzelem Elokim of any individual person is just one Tzelem Elokim of all humans, and therefore any other person's eye is equal to his. Just occurred to me. Maybe that's why you don't blind someone else's eye. Because, maybe this is the pshat. The reason why you don't actually blind someone else's eye is because it's actually the greatest perversion of justice. Because if it's wrong that Ruvain blinded Shimon, why is it wrong? Because Shimon should have an eye. Well, by that same logic, Reuven should have an eye. Maybe that's the problem. In other words, the reason why we don't do, so ayin tachas ayin sort of points to its liquidification, turn it into liquidity. Because you're going to take out an eye because the guy lost an eye, but then if that's a problem, then the other guy shouldn't lose an eye either. All humans have it. Mela, if a person is a god, so good. So this person's a god. So how come he lost his eye? But really, the other person's also a god. Meaning, because it's not a bunch of different gods. It's so each person is equally supposed to have an eye. Okay, something to think about there. Maybe, like I said, there's something here. I'm getting legami. Okay, let's go weiter in psukim here. So we're in Perek Mem Ches. Let's go to pasuk Dalid. Let's just read pasuk Dalid again. We noticed last time that you see, if you go back to Pashas Vayishlach, you could see almost word for word. Yaakov is quoting. There, Hashem told him also not just Kal Goyim, but also Milochim, kings. Yaakov omitted any mention of kings when recounting the blessing to Israel. Why? Very simple. Because he's going to soon give the kingship to Yehuda. And he's going to say, Lo Yosur Shevet Yehuda M'chaykim Ben Raglov. And therefore, when he's telling Yosef about his blessings, he leaves out anything about kings because he doesn't want Yosef, who is the most natural contender for kingship, at least at this stage, because he was the one who was actually acting as a Mishnah Lamelech, is here being essentially told that no, you will not be the king of the people. Yes, Yehuda will be. You won't be the king, but you'll be the Bechor. So you see right away, he's telling like this, there was a great blessing of, and this we discussed last time, I'll just say it again briefly, that what I understand what Yaakov is doing over here is he's saying, I received a blessing, and now I'm going to give that blessing. I want to transmit that blessing to you. The blessing is about para, verava, kal amim, plural, multiplicity, and I'm going to give that blessing to you and take your children, to which you multiplied, ki efrane elikim, and connect them, incorporate them into that bracha, but not the bracha of kings. He leaves that out, and sort of suggesting that he doesn't prefer kingship to come from Yosef, rather to come from Yehuda, as is confirmed in the bracha to Yehuda. Notably, though, in the future, kingship will come from Yosef to disastrous effects, as we shall see. Okay. Now, just to understand what's happening in the Psukim, Yaakov is speaking from Pasukim Gimel through Zion, and then he sees the children and says, who are these? So there's one way to read this is that was an interruption. He noticed them. Another way to read it, and this is definitely part of the reading, is that Gimel through Zion is a unit, and he stops, and it's a new story. But for sure, it's a unit to some extent, I think. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Maybe not. I guess you could read that he was about to say something else, and they noticed them. So I shouldn't say that, but I just want to more. Okay. So as we said, he's taking them, and he's including them in his bracha. Vayivarch Oisi and Lihaim. He's including his children, the children of Yosef, into his bracha. He was blessed from Kirshakai, and he wants to bring that to them. Lihaim, of course, contrasts to the next pasuk we call Yehu. And this continues, he just mentioned Achuzas Haaretz. So Lihaim then suggests that they're going to have a nachala, a unique, their own nachala in Eretz Yisrael, which is supported by the next pasuk that says, but the rest of them that you have after them will be Hashem Achem Yikor Ben Nachal Asam. So there's an issue of nachal here. Why is an issue of nachal here? Because he just said that I'm going to give you this land Achuzas Olam. So he's taking two of the sons, Lihaim, in the context of Chuzim, they're going to get a unique nachala ba'aretz. By the way, he puts Ephraim before Menashe. That's Lushitasa that he's going to put Ephraim before Menashe, and by Yosem as Ephraim before Menashe, like it says later, explicitly. Right, and then but here he's just calling them by name. I guess that's okay, but in other words, okay, here Yosef doesn't say, hey, why are you doing that first? Or the pasuk doesn't make a point of it. He's not blessing them. But nonetheless, Yaakov is putting his name first, consistent with the fact that he's going to give Ephraim a superiority over Menashe. Okay. By the way, Ephraim and Menashe sounds like Reuven and Shimon. Ephraim, Reuven, you have the Resh, Mem and the Nun are similar, the Aleph, you have the Fei and the Vez, and Menashe and Shimon, of course, Shem, Mem, Nun, and Ayin and Hey are similar. Okay. I think you may have heard this from Dani Genek, but either way, it's there. Okay, I want to say a word about this. It's a very interesting way that Yaakov talks about these two children. He doesn't just say, let's say, those who were born to you in the land of Mitzrayim, or he could have even said Ephraim and Menashe. Okay, so he wants to say something about the fact they are born in Mitzrayim. Okay, why Shnei Banecha? What's the point of saying Shnei Banecha, the two children? And by the way, it sounds like he had other children, right? Because of that's a question. Did he have another children? But let's just say he did have other children. So what's this meaning of Shnei Banecha? Now, here maybe it's okay. Shnei Banecha, those two. But look at the pasuk before. It says in pasuk Aleph, Vayikach Shnei Banav Imai. So if he had other children, why are we calling the Shnei Banav? Okay, but not to put too much of a point on that. I just want to point out more basic. In pasuk A, it says Shnei Banecha, which is really, you could have maybe done without that in the pasuk in terms of who they are. We're just trying to introduce them. The same idea of his two sons we have in pasuk Aleph. And, of course, we have this also in Parshas Miketz. It's Ulu Yosef Yulad Shnei Banim. Okay? So, what's that about? What's the idea of these two children being called Shnei Banim? Now, notice over here that it's significant in the pasuk that they're born in the land of Mitzrayim, of course. And they're born in Mitzrayim before Yaakov came. So, this takes us back to the birth of these children born in Mitzrayim, going back there to Parshas Miketz. Ulu Yosef Yulad Shnei Banim. So before the Rav, he had two banim. As we said, there's a stress that there's two banim. These are Shnei Vanov, Shnei Vanecha. These were born to him in the land of Mitzrayim before he was united with Yaakov. And what's Yaakov doing? He's saying like this: these children were born when I wasn't with you, separate from me. When you were in the land of Mitzrayim, before I was united with you, so I'm going to bring them back in. Now, I want to say, if we look at the Shnei Banav, we'll see what is the significance. What's he bringing them back in for? It's perfect. It fits in perfectly. Go back to Parshas Miketz. It says, so this is in Perek Mem Aleph Pasuk Mem Tes. Let's start from there. Yosef piled up the grain, like the sand, more than you could count. There was no number for it. Ad ki choda lispar ki ein mispar. So much grain, there was no number. And Yosef had two children. So look at the contrast. Look at the irony. The grain was uncountable. And Yosef had two children. Now, two children is the opposite of uncountable, right? It's the opposite of not having a number. It's a plurality. It's more than one, but it's the bare minimum that makes you more than one. So imagine you talk about how much grain there was, uncountable grain, and to Yosef were born two children. So it's pointing out that while there's all this riboy going on in the land of Mitzrayim with the grain, Yosef's own children did not participate in this blessing of multiplying. Rather, he only had two children. So now let's go back. The Shnei Banim, these Ephraim and Menashe, these are Yosef's two children. And let me explain to you what that means. Yosef may have had a whole bunch of other children after the hunger came and after Yaakov came, after the end of the hunger and Yaakov came to Mitzrayim. But these were the two children. You know, like you have a family where someone has two children, and then maybe there's the brothers, right? like they're the brothers, and then 10 years later they have siblings, but they're always the brothers, the two brothers. So these were the two brothers because they were born at a certain time, and it was like, Yosef only has these two children, he's not having a whole big family in the land of Mitzrayim. So comes Yaakov and says, wait a second, I have a bracha, I want to, your sons that are born in Mitzrayim, who were not born under the blessing of Riboy. On the contrary, the Riboy is Bnei Yisrael's Riboy. You are separate from us in the land of Mitzrayim. You seem to not be experiencing this Riboy, and therefore I want to take the and include them in the Riboy. Once we came and joined you, everything's fine. So what's happening is a bracha about Riboy, which is really explicit, because what's the punchline of his bracha to the children? V'yidgu la'roiv b'kerev aretz. He's giving them the bracha of Revia, of multiplying like fish, and notably also he says b'kerev aretz. B'kerev aretz. We'll have to see when we get to what we said so many times. I think it's a gra. B'kerev aretz means in Eretz Yisrael, as it says in Sefer Yeshua that the Shevet Ephraim became so numerous and there was no room for them in Eretz Yisrael, while the rest of Bnei Yisrael increased while they were in the land of Mitzrayim. Ephraim only increased a big care of art. So that points to the fact that these children of Yosef do not participate in the blessing of period of reproduction, of multiple reproduction that Bnei Yisrael experienced, because they were in the land of Mitzrayim. They're going to eventually, Yaakov is bringing them back into the fold and saying that the bracha will eventually pay off, but only b'kerev haaretz, when they get back to Eretz Yisrael. And remember also we said last week in Divrei Yomim, it says that Bnei Ephraim went, and those who were nelodim ba'aretz decimated them. The children of Ephraim, and Ephraim mourned them. So there's always the nelodim ba'aretz in Eretz Yisrael. There's all the competition between those that are nelodim in Eretz Mitzrayim and are tainted by that, and those that are nelodim ba'aretz. So here Yaakov is trying to rectify that. Okay, we spoke about this also. I mean, we spoke about this in Miketz, that you have to look at the fact that the grain is so numerous. Read that in light of Mizmor Kuf Mem Zayin, where it talks about Hashem's understanding having no number in Mispar, and there it says Berach Banayich Bikirbeich in Yerushalayim. That's where there's an increase in the Bonim. Magdol Yaakov, Mishpat of Yisrael, where it's Hashem is Yirei of. So Yirei of is Yaakov. So when Yosef is separate from Yaakov, and he's doing the Mitzrayim thing, the Gruas Asus, the Sheker Ish, he doesn't participate in the blessing of Berach Banayich and Ein Mispar, because he's doing the Mitzrayim way. He's not doing Hashem's Tun Ein Mispar way. He might have grain that's Ein Mispar, but he doesn't get the Berach Banayich. And he gives the Chelev to the enemy. He shouldn't. It's really Chelev Chitim Yas Biech. It's really for Yerushalayim. It's really for the gates of Yerushalayim. Okay. So Yaakov is trying to bring him back into that. Okay. Now, so the blessing to Yaakov is going to be Kahal Amim. Kahal Amim means an interesting thing, that Bnei Yisrael is not one nation, it's a nation comprised of many Kahals or Amim. So very important, of course. This idea of Shvatim, like, is it one nation, is it 12 different nations? Okay. Now, what did he do here? What did Yaakov do? He took Yosef and he divided him into two. Right? Shnei Banecha are going to have really Pi Shnayim. So I want to explain, I want to suggest really, that what's happening is like this. Yosef had two sons. Like, oh, poor Yosef, he only had two sons. Two is not a lot. Two is the bare minimum to have more than one. To have a plural number of sons. Okay, new. But then what if Yosef himself divides into two? That's really cool. So or multiplies by two. So what Yaakov is doing is he's saying like this: you think you only have two children. Actually, those two children stand for the fact that you have doubled. You have turned into two. That's what Pishnayim is. It's like taking one person, the Bechar, and making him into two. And of course, this is what Yaakov is doing over here. He's giving the Bechira to Yosef, as it says in Divrei Yomim, as it says in Divrei Yomim Perek what? Hey, Divrei Yom Aleph Perek. Let's see. Hey, V'nei Ruven Bechor Yisrael ki hu ha-Bechor, B'chal lo yitzui avinit ha-Bechor Yosef V'nei Yosef ben Yisrael. He's given the Bechor. How is he given the Bechor? Because he gets Pishnayim. So this is where it's happening, right? He's getting Pishnaim. Now, as we just explained, this is Yaakov addressing the fact that Ephraim and Manasseh are not a lot of children. And look at what a beautiful way it's being addressed. He's saying that 2 is a small number. Yes, 2 is a small number if you're talking about how many children the person has. But if we're talking about how many people one person is, 2 is an amazing number, because all of a sudden one person is considered like 2. This is the innovation of Pishnaim right here, that we're taking the Bechor here. Not Yosef is not the Bechor, not the true Bechor. He's the Ben Ahuva. And Yaakov makes him into the Bechor and gives him Pishnaim, and he treats him as if he's 2 people. And I have a hunch also, let's just put this out there, that the reason why the Bechor is treated like 2 people is because he has to break away from his father. In other words, the Bechor is so identified with his father that he has to then move away on his own and create his own identity, because he starts off as having the father so close as opposed to other siblings. I think that's something to think about. And therefore he's like 2 people. Yosef was separate from his father, so therefore he's really like a new person. Besides being a hemshech of his father, he's really a new person in his own right, and therefore he's like the Bechor, and he's like 2 people. Okay, now, of course, is this a good thing that he made Yosef the Bechor? So we read in Pashas Kisei, Ki yele shtei nashim v'achasnu ava v'achasnu av yod levonim v'avu v'asnua lo yuchal v'hoya b'yom ha'chinas b'nu v'siyah lo yuchal v'akez b'navav b'nim so because b'chanu ziyakid lo spishtai. Fine. Ki hu reishis oinoi, like he says to Reuven b'chor yata koichi b'reishis oini. So, and Ahuva and Snua arach alanea. So here the pasuk saying not to do what Yaakov did. Pashut. I think one of the Rishonim, Cheskuni Panchrazah, but I tell you, someone asks, Kimu Avskoter Kulos Yaakov lo yuchal levaka, and the answer, no, lo yuchal levaka, is responding to Yaakov. So in other words, this is really the pasuk saying it's a pasuk the legislating against the narrative of Bereshit. Okay, it's a very interesting thing. Now we noticed also, we mentioned before that Yaakov gave him the Bechor, but not the Melucha. He deliberately left out any mention of kingship, because he's not giving kingship to Yosef. In fact, he's sort of taking away from him, giving it to Yehuda. But he does give Yosef the Bechorah. So we could suggest, and I think this is probably true. Look at that pasuk again in the Vayamim. So it says, the Bechorah was taken from Reuven and given to Yosef. And then the next pasuk says, Ki Yehuda gavar ba'ochiv u'lunogid mimenu v'bechorah leYosef. Yehuda is the gavar and the nogid, and Yosef gets the Bechorah. So the fact that Yosef is given the Bechorah is a continuation of the competition between Yosef and Yehuda that's happening throughout these parashiyos, and of course it will continue into the kingdoms of Yosef and Yehuda respectively. No, not respectively. The competition will happen between the kingdoms of Yosef and Yehuda. So, because it's like this, Yehuda is the nugget, okay, but Yosef is the Bechor. And what that means is that Yosef here, although his father is not giving the Melucha, he is giving the Bechor, which puts him in the position of always thinking, maybe I should get the Melucha. So in other words, let's say the counterfactual. Let's say Lo Yuchal Levaka. Let's say he would not have treated Yosef as the Bechor. And he would have said, look, I go with the physical Bechor, Reuven is the physical Bechor, Ki hu Reish Hasaynai, I don't go with Cheshbainis. I would say like this. Reuben's not going to try to be king. Why should he be king? Reuben is never effective in the whole Parshas Bereshis. You know who's effective? Yehuda and Yosef. If Yosef is given something, he's given the Bechorah, he's likely to eventually make a play on the Melucha, which is exactly what happened. So that's the Lo Yuchal Levaka. So Yaakov leaves out Malachim Mimcha Yitzeu because he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to suggest to Yosef that you're going to be king. On the contrary, but by giving him the Bechorah, he's still allowing him to have some power, which eventually is going to lead Yosef or his descendants into thinking, hey, we're actually natural leaders, and maybe we should be kings. So therefore, Lo Yuchal Levaka, not a good thing to do.